Okay, so now is the last speaker. So we have Professor Pasqualini.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
No.
Still can't hear me.
Okay.
All right, can you hear me now? And can also see the screen?
Yes, just so Professor Pasqualini is Italian. He's an associate professor in industrial bioengineering at the University of Pavia in Italy. He has been trained in biomedical engineering in Italy before moving to Boston in 2010 and Zurich in 2016 to study the cardiovascular tissue engineering in the laboratories of Professor Parker at Harvard Weiss Institute and Professor Hortrup, I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, with the Translation Center. Francesco's research focuses on development in silico in vitro stem cell models for drug discovery, disease modeling, regenerative medicine application, and he has gained is one important funding through the ERC starting grant and other programs related to research programs. One is the Resilient programs, and then one others from the Ministry of Research in Italy, as well as Horizon Europe to develop his lab. So I think we give you now the floor. So welcome and
awesome.
Please.
Thanks for having me and for the introduction. I placed a slide here just to say that, you know, I'm not in the cancer field, so I figured I should justify why am I particularly given this talk. So I came back to Italy, as you know, many of you will probably know, it's not the most funding rich environment, and I was able to set up a lab through competitive fundings. I was also fortunate enough in Boston to get a lot of training for DARPA and NIH type writing. So I put together a fair amount of material, and we also started this association of ERC awardees in Italy. It's called ERC in Italy, and I am the vice president and also the sort of delegate for training activities. And this is how I got essentially invited to talk to you today. And I was looking at the talk title I was given, and I sort of love and hate some of the wording. And we just heard some amazing content from the other speakers on how important kind of wording things is, that I thought, you know, maybe let me just get sort of what I liked the most and what I hated the most about this. I love the wording of persuasion, and I love the concept of marketing. And of course, I love research. I am less fond of this idea that we can sort of, you know, highlight and then talk about impact, and it makes it sound like we can do, you know, whatever research and then sort of wrap it in a way or spin it in a way that would somehow make it more fundable or more persuade people to give you money. But I think, and this I think comes from a number of problems in academia, and one of the big ones that I personally sort of fight against is you know, a grant, it's not a prize. Like a lot of people that have ERCs will even write in their signature, oh, I'm an ERC laureate. Like a grant is not a price. It's taxpayers' euros, an investment in your idea. It's essentially, you know, a form of privilege. And there is no essentially God-given right to, you know, receiving public money for your particular research. The government might set up initiatives to cure diseases, cure cancer. That's, you know, all well and true, but it's up to you as a researcher to go out there and raise the money for your idea versus the other idea, versus spending that money directly for, you know, clinical practice, putting, you know, equipment in the hospitals. It's actually a responsibility, and people should sort of like start thinking about grant proposals that way, that I'm sticking my head out saying that I deserve, like my idea deserves 2 million euros, and that's better than paving the streets or like equipping a hospital or hiring a doctor. We need to start feeling that. And I think in that, I love the comment on marketing that was also made earlier by Chiara. Great marketing is actually integral to product design. You don't design a product and then like, oh, you try to spin it in a way that makes it look cool. I mean, bad products are designed that way, but good products, you know, you think how you're going to market, you think about your customers as you make the product, and you sort of that product market fit that makes great story. And I also love that word storytelling was already just used beautifully. You know, your scientific storytelling is part of your research. You don't do a bunch of research and then sit down and like, okay, how do we do it? Otherwise, people will have to sit with you and like ask you a ton of whys to get to the bottom of what you've been doing. And so I think the exercise of thinking about storytelling through the lens of the research you are doing, you want to do, you are in the process of doing, maybe in your sort of junior years as a PhD students or postdocs in other people's laboratory, like get in the habit of, okay, I'm doing this experiment. This is part of the story. Who's protagonist? Who's the antagonist? Whose monster am I fighting? And then develop that habit of storytell what you're doing a lot more so that it will become easier when you have to write a proposal. So yeah, bottom line is that persuasion is important. We should, really approach grant writing as, fundraising. Like if you have a startup and you're pitching your ideas to investors, you're going to ask for these people for 2 million of their fund, 5 million, 10 million, whatever, and they will look at the return on the investment. And when you write a proposal, reviewers are essentially strangers. You are asking for a lot of money for your ideas. And so don't try to dress up average work. You just heard amazing content on how to actually write a proposal. But what I'm trying to sort of highlight here in this talk is make sure your research is actually worth the time it's going to take you to do all the work that the previous speakers have beautifully highlighted. And then if the reviewers decide to find it because it's so beautifully proposed, like it's actually worth doing. So again, grant research naturally radiates relevance and impact. If you can do that, then persuasion is just clarity and focus. It's not spin. If you find yourself, I need to find a way to say this so that it feels more impactful, or if it feels more like I have to use the word breakthrough 10 times in my abstract, there is no breakthrough. You have to make, as was also just said, right? Like you have to make the reviewers understand and believe by themselves that what you're proposing is breakthrough. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how many times you say it, they will not believe it. All right, so with that big introduction, I sort of organized these using sort of my ERC as one example. I think what we're talking about applies very well to starting, consolidated, and advanced grant proposals. Synergies and proof of concept are a little bit special, so maybe we'll take them separate. We just heard most European Commission grants are organized around 3 pillars: excellence, impact, and implementation. ERC is just about excellence. Again, this is a wording issue. Like within excellence, the impact of your research will be evaluated. You just don't have to budget for things that will lead to impact, which is the case for most other grants. The other thing that's sort of special of ERC is that there's a 2-step evaluation process. In the first step, only your CV and a short form of the proposal, it's called B1, 5 to 6 pages, are actually looked at by a panel of generalists in your field. And then the extend proposal, B2, it's also, if you pass sort of B1 or phase 1, then you go to phase 2, where more reviewers will look at your full proposal. This is a 15 pages plus, and then you'll get asked for an interview. Importantly, you do not have the feedback on your first one, phase 1 evaluation before you go to the interview. So you're flying blind. So all the comments you just heard about having people review your proposals apply 10 times if you are invited for an interview. Send your proposal to as many people as you can, get feedback, prepare for the interview. I'm happy to answer more specific questions about the interview later if anyone's interested. So how to ERC. This is sort of, again, a longer course that we give out as ERC in Italy. So today you guys get a sort of a pill for that. And this is my formula for success. Like they will evaluate the PI, the principal investigator, then they will evaluate the project, and the project must be a function of the PI. It must be the perfect project for you. And then that's sort of a deterministic portion of the success. And then it gets multiplied by, a chance factor, like how lucky are you in that particular round of evaluation. And so I think it's really important to keep like this sort of formula in mind, because it sort of lead to my 10 points or 10 rules that I want you guys to remember for, sort of persuasive storytelling of your research. So point 1, which is, if you don't remember anything else of everything I'm going to say today, just remember join or start, if you're in the process of starting, a rocket ship. Join or start a rocket ship. And of course, know yourself, know the rules, know the enemy, be crazy and right. This is my sort of vision statements. We'll get to that later. Be clear was already kind of mentioned. Be memorable, work hard. Money is the easiest part. We're going to talk about this later, but for now, just focus on getting money. But don't forget that it's the easiest part. And then just don't ever give up. I am not authorizing anyone here to give up on their dreams of, becoming a PI and actually curing cancer by whatever ideas you guys have. All right, so let's go one by one through these. Join, start a rocket ship. I didn't come up with the words. Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook fame sort of said this. In academia, this can be, Marie Curie is actually the lowest success rate I'm aware of in EU. ERC is like about 10% or 15%. If you are in the Italian academic system, getting through, getting a professorship normally as a success rate that's sort of less than 1%. If you go to industry, you want to join a rocket ship of a startup that's well-funded. You want to start a startup that's well-funded. You can go into consulting. Again, pick places that are rocket ships. Why you should pick places that are rocket ship? This is an example from a few years. I think in 2024, the HHMI, the Harvard University Medical Institute, is a big funder in the US. And these came out, and there was a big outright on social media because most of the people that were awarded an HHMI grant in 2024 were actually trained in HHMI-funded investigator labs and had multiple first author science and nature papers or cell papers. And this has been perceived across the board as access to hidden disparities and biases of the reviewers for people that were in this place. And hey, some of that might be true, but the other way, you could look at a piece of data like that, and this is what I want to encourage everybody to do, is to think that maybe if you're training in a lab that has an expectation for excellence, right? Because the PI was funded that way, and most of the people in there are funded that way, and the projects they're funded on are certain types of projects. Maybe you get exposed to some of these concepts we are discussing today a little bit earlier, and maybe they become part of your innate way of doing things, and then you get an easier life, essentially winning an HHMI grant. And this can apply to ERC, can apply to Marie Curie, can apply to go into industry. Like figure out, if you are on a rocket ship, where is that rocket ship going? And if you want to go in that same place, then you're in the right place. If there's a mismatch, then you might want to reconsider where you're getting your training, and if that's going to propel you to where you want to go. So rocket ships, don't forget rocket ships. The other, this was kind of a later point in my earlier talks, and then the more we talk to people, the more this becomes the most important part. Know yourself. The Oracle in Delphi at this inscription, so people will go there to find out about their future, and they would be reminded right at the entrance that the best predictor of your future is sort of how well you know yourself. And this has a number of sort of philosophical implications that we don't have the time to go into. But for the purpose of the ERC or grant specific, this is that connection between the project and the PI. I can't tell you, I think every time we give this talk, at least 50% of the people come up to me there after the talk and have a discussion of the type, hey, I would really love to write this ERC grant on XYZ. Unfortunately, I have an issue, and then they proceed to tell me the issue, and the issue is exactly why they are the perfect candidate for XYZ. One example was a person wanted to do a nanotech coating of historical buildings for energy preservation purposes. Very cool project. And her big concern was, yeah, I have a PhD in engineering and nanotechnology, but my background, my training is actually in arts, and I was doing the architectures of historical buildings. And so she had been made sort of extremely sensitive because in the environment she was in, she was perceived as an outsider who didn't have a background in engineering, so couldn't really do tech. But if your project is multidisciplinary in that sense, and you want to do nanotech for historical heritage building, like that background is perfect. You can't shy away from that. And so, again, many, many examples. People have demons, and if you can kill that demon before you start writing, you'll find that that's probably your biggest strength. And my sister is a psychologist, so I might be the wrong Pasqualini to talk about this, but go face a mirror, slaying your demon, everything else will be easier. So that now becomes my point too. Again, the role of the PI in getting funded, it's super important, right? It's evaluated by itself, and it's also evaluated through the lens of the project. So if you don't know who you are, you're going to write a fantastic cancer project for some other cancer research, for your PI, because maybe that's the best sort of environment that you are aware of, and so you're going to write with that mind frame. You have to write your project. And so if you don't know who you are, what you stand for, what's like keeping you up at night when you're thinking about your science, you're not going to do as good a job as you could. And the other aspect here is, and we'll talk about that in a second, is if you know you have maybe this is very typical of Southern Europe candidates. If you have some weaknesses in your PI profile, then you must make sure your project is outstanding. Like you have, I think somebody talked about this in slightly different terms earlier. The way I like to think about it is you have a goodwill budget with the reviewer. And so you have to allocate where you're going to spending that budget. If you know you have some weaknesses in the PI profile, then your project must be bulletproof. Vice versa, if you're very strong as a PI, you might get away with some weaknesses in the project. And you must be aware of this when you review other people's ERCs. People will tend to send them to you, especially if they're like a few years old. You get access to a few templates if you ask nicely. And you always have to evaluate them like, okay, when this person applied and won, I can see some weaknesses in the project, but the person's CV was outstanding. And vice versa. I was like, oh, maybe they didn't have, as many science and nature papers as some other winners, but the project was outstanding. And so keeping that balance in mind and sort of allocate your goodwill budget from sort of a reviewer perspective. Know the rules. Many people talked about many different things, so I just want to mention a couple that are ERC specific. All institutions don't matter. Formally, no points can be taken out of your evaluation because people don't know your own institution. Reviewers might have positive or negative bias versus certain host institutions. So you might want to be, like if you are applying from a host institution that's a little less well-known, like University of Pavia, you might want to add a few sentences throughout the proposal that underline how every resource you might need for the project is actually present at the university, so that people tend to make that assumption for ETH Zurich. And maybe they won't give you that same sort of blanket approval to University of Pavia, but if you put it down in the proposal, then that takes care of it. So that's my only sort of tip for institution. The rule for when apply to ERC is like fairly sort of specific, and there's some tips here as well. So it's mostly driven by the timeline from your PhD. So 2 to 7 years from your PhD, you're eligible for an ERC starting. 7 to 12, you're eligible for an ERC consolidator, and 12 plus, you're eligible for an advanced. And there's leaves of absence, maternity leaves, sick leaves. There's specific rules to all of these. And the one sort of things that's important is if you're not evaluated high enough, then you cannot reapply the following years. So this is the one sort of strategic decisions you make. Say that you're applying for a starting grant and you are 5 years from your PhD and you think your stuff is okay, but could be better, you apply. Because even if you don't get evaluated high enough, then you will not have year 6 to apply, but you can still apply in year 7. If this happens in year 6, and you're not quite sure, you don't apply, because if they make you not apply in year 7, then you lose your last opportunity to do a starting. You have to be the consolidators, and people tend to have sort of strong HCVs at the consolidator stage. So this is the one sort of a couple of rules that I think is important. But yeah, do the homework, study the rule book, and figure out how to best position yourself. Know thy enemy. This is sort of the hardest of the PI points I want to talk about. So essentially, I don't like to consider people in the field our enemies. So I sort of rephrase this as sort of be competitive. You want to make sure you stand out in some sense within the competition, right? So are you ready? The ERCF, so the executive agency of the ERC, or the European Research Council, gives you some specific criteria. So first, check these criteria. For example, for a starting, you must have at least one paper without your PhD advisor. So if you don't have one paper without your PhD advisor, go get one before you apply for ERC. Otherwise, you will be eliminated based on that simple sort of fact. And then talk with as many ERC awardees or panel members you can find for any unwritten guidance. Certain panels have, again, sort of unwritten rules where, like, if you have a below a certain H index, they're not supposed to do it, but there's a bias against people that have not have a high enough H index. So again, we can complain about that not being a rule, but we can also sort of do something about that. Either you change your panel, or you wait until your H index is high enough, or again, sort of maybe ERC is not the right grant for that particular idea you've got, and you can find alternative funding agencies. This is sort of, wait. Where is my talk go? Sorry, guys. Yep. So winning ERC is high. It's difficult enough. If you are competitive, that I really strongly recommend you focus on this first. If you know you are competitive, then go for it. If you're not ready, get ready before you get writing, because otherwise you just end up investing a lot of time to make a great product that will not get funded because a portion of the scoring is associated to your CV and how competitive you are as a PI. So you think you're ready, make sure you write a CV that makes sense for reviewers. This is, I especially see this with people in Italy or Southern Europe. So first of all, okay, look at international reviewers. Like you might have a national habilitation that's assigned, on a number of sort of scientific, but also political considerations in certain countries. And that might mean nothing to an international reviewer. So make sure that, if you're going to use that as a title, then it's spelled out in a way that makes sense for people. This is true also in the other case. Like if you have, this happens a lot in humanities in Southern Europe, for example. People might be professors in the sense that they are teaching, but maybe they're still on a postdoc contract. And so they end up writing these administratively correct, but very complicated set of sentences where their current role is professor, but then their current contract is a postdoc. And for an international reviewer, that makes no sense. And so, maybe adjunct professor is the terminology you want to use because that makes sense internationally and it's aligned with the academic concepts that you're trying to explain or the administrative concepts you're trying to explain. And people will just scroll through it. A reviewer will scroll through it, will read something that makes sense and sort of move on. And then the other thing is, are you the right person for this project? And this is super important, right? So for many people, this is sort of digital. If you want a real prize in your field, you want a field medal, you're probably getting an advanced ERC, no problem. So don't worry about it, right? If not, you have to spend some serious time sort of going through this. And again, the best way you can do this is talk with people that have won or are panel members in the panel you are applying. Reach out to them early in advance when there is no conflict of interest, when you haven't submitted your proposal, you haven't written a grant, like ask for their advice in that capacity if they're willing to give that advice, if they don't have a conflict of interest. And then when they say yes, then you can ask away. And our experience is that all the ERCs, for example, in our association, always very happy to kind of pay it forward and help junior people do this. So that's easy. If you're kind of ready, then get to work on fixing some problems. And again, Italy, Southern European might have some common challenges that I think it's good to spend a second to talk about. But first, again, let me remind you that it really doesn't matter how you come about some weaknesses in your current CV. The success rate at these grants is so relatively low that you just have to overcome the weakness. There is no specific mechanism by which you can justify a weakness away. So again, sort of nobody cares. Don't take excuses along the way. And I say excuses very, very widely, right? Like you might have extremely good reason for not having multidisciplinary exposure or international exposure, but it's still not going to help you. One example very quickly, now the ERC template as a space that says, hey, how did COVID affected you? And you can, there's some check marks. You can say, hey, I was sick. I had to take care of people that were sick, or there's some space where you can spell out things. And now everyone writes, a number of like sentences. And there's only 44 spots for the phase 2 interview. And there's simply nothing you can write there that our reviewer will consider on par of a Nature paper having been published. And the fact that the template has some space for it makes you think that there is a way to evaluate it against papers or outcomes or patents or products that you've pushed out of the door, but there just isn't. So by all means, fill it up, say it. If it's true, I also personally reviewed somebody who said he had terrible COVID experience and then he had twice as many papers during COVID than he did 10 years prior. So you're like, okay, now you're lying to me. And again, my goodwill budget for you is essentially spent. So always be honest, but just like, fix your issues if you know you have any. Internalization, independence, multidisciplinarity, excellence are typical issues that people have. spend some short time at international core facilities to access a very fancy new piece of equipment for a field you're not extremely experienced with. It's a fantastic way to fix all four of them. And if you can just squeeze that in, will be great. Short stay, collaborations, anything you might do to tackle these problems goes a long way in the proposal, right? Like each one of these issues can kill your proposal if you don't address it. But if you address it and you show that you are aware of it and you are putting in some effort to fix it, then the reviewer who has decided they like your project will use that goodwill budget to your advantage and be like, yeah, no, she knows she doesn't have any international experience. Maybe she was sick during COVID and that was, her PhD time was curtailed because COVID, she couldn't travel. She said so much, she started this collaboration. I'm going to trust this person to kind of pull through. And then that's how you buy sort of goodwill from your reviewers. Now, vision. This is specific to ERC. This does not apply to many other grants. For example, it does not apply to NIH R01. It does apply to HHMI and it does apply to DARPA and to ERC. That's it. When they say high risk, high gain, these funding agencies mean it. And some other funding agencies will tell you that it's high risk, but then it's not. So I want to encourage everyone starting tomorrow to start looking at things that don't make sense. A lot of the comments we always get is like, oh no, this piece of evidence makes sense in the light of this literature, of that literature. But what you really want is the contrarian argument. Like you want to be, looking at things that, you and the very smart people, will disagree on, right? Because if everybody agrees on something, if we know it makes sense, like it will be done faster by a bigger group. Like your existing group can do any incremental follow-up research on the project you are currently doing way better with way less risk and way faster than you can start in your lab. So any idea that feels like it's walking like the blue people are walking here, you discard immediately. Like in my group, we have a rule that if there's more than 5 competitors in everything we're doing, then we just stop doing it. Like it's just too many people. I don't care. We'll just give up. Right. And so the way to do that is essentially you look at your ideas for something like an ERC or DARPA or HHMI and a few very other selected places. And you really want to be, when you're writing, like in between these two things. Like you actually want to have the doubt in your mind keeps you up at night that you might actually be crazy. You might be right, but you might also be crazy. And you sort of want to live with that indecision. I know people who, like their evaluation report from the ERC said, the preliminary data makes the project not high risk. Like if you have preliminary data that shows your hypothesis is correct, then ERC is not interested in funding it. It doesn't mean it's a bad project or it's a bad idea. It just means it's not tailored for the ERC. Go on some Horizon Europe program and have it funded. You can get same amount of money, even more money. You can have a better team to tackle that idea. But these types of like sort of frontier research, you want to be in between, right? And crazy. And you just want to be there, really, really, really be there. And a way to be there and not go crazy is that you actually know a secret, right? So this is Pythagorean theorem. My kids in elementary school is learning about it. But in the 5th century before Christ, this was a closely guarded secret. Like you had to join Pythagoras' vegan sect to be told how this little mathematical trick works, so you could go make money helping people draw boundaries in their sort of fields. Right? So every great success today was a secret 5, 10, 15 years ago. Right? And so at some point in the field, CRISPR-Cas9 was a secret. There's only a few people in whose lab, they get some preliminary evidence that this was going to work. Today, it's a tool, it's a technique. We buy reagents, we do it in an engineering lab like mine, right? And so what you really want to know in 2025 is what secret do I know that other people would disagree with me on because they don't know it yet. But if I explain it to them, if I can get 2 million, 5 years, a team of 3 people, like we can pull this off. We can explain to the world that Pythagorean theorem in 2025 is these other things that relates to cancer. So some tricks to generate good ideas. What was the biggest innovation in your field over the last sort of 10 to 15 years? And again, when we do this in the class, I have people write it down. Just spend 5 minutes, write it down. What was the biggest innovation? And then you're like, okay, who were the people credible with those ideas back then, 10, 15 years ago? Whose lab were they? What were they working on? Why were these people credible? Like specifically, did they have the right tool? Did they studying the right problem? Did they have access to some specific piece of technology? What was it? And then what are you credible for today that can make you sort of do the same leap that they did the last 15 years? See how this is fundamentally different than proposing, to continue to do whatever you are currently doing, just adding insert hyped up, term of your choosing, AI, 3D printing, CRISPR, whatever, right? Like this is fundamentally different. You're looking into the future 10, 15 years from now, and you're trying to pull that future into the present rather than starting from the past and the present and be like, okay, the next step is to apply fancy technique of your choosing to my problem. Fundamentally different. All right, now be clear. So this has been said, and I mentioned it earlier again, that the sort of, if you do this right, if you design your projects to be the right projects, then marketing is just clarity. Just don't screw it up, right? Just explain it very well. And one thing we find that's typically sort of poorly articulated is sort of the plan. Like you started with a problem that you want to solve, you have this crazy idea to solve it, and you are somehow credible that, okay, it's a crazy idea, but if somebody's going to pull it off, it's this person writing it. And then you have to say, how are you going to prove that your idea actually solves the challenge you had identified, the gap you had identified? And one sort of common mistake, it's sort of not to think about these articulation of your plan in terms of a grant proposal. Maybe you think about it in terms of how you're going to do the research, very sort of sequentially. Well, first we're going to do the synthesis, then we're going to do the in vitro, and then we're going to do the in vivo. And like sometimes that's the only way you can do it. But the problem with this serial allocation of objectives or aims or work packages or whatever you want to call them is that if your aim one fails, then everything else fails. And certain grants have like milestones, and so you can build this, and it's a milestone gated budget. So only if you unlock object one, then you get the money for object two, and that makes sense. But grants that have like a full amount upfront, like an ERC, it's a big feasibility problem if your work packages are too interconnected. And so I borrowed this definition from consulting, this MACE, so it stands for mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. And the idea is you want to take all the activities that you need to show that your idea actually solves the problem, and you want to break them into objectives, work packages, and aims that are independent or as independent as possible from one another. And then each of these objectives is going to carry a piece of the innovation content, a piece of the importance of the research, and then together they will collectively sort of demonstrate that your idea actually solves the problem. And so if you can do that, that feasibility risk of the structure of the project falls, and it's also sort of very clear how you've thought about this, and you show the reviewer that you're actually aware of some of the challenges that they might be thinking about too. Each objective should encompass your series of studies, experiments. Couple speakers talk beautifully about like methodology. You don't typically in these grants, you don't have a lot of space, but that's not an excuse not to be specific on the methodology, especially in the case of the ERC, the B1, so the phase one evaluation on the short form. Essentially, no expert in your field, or maybe one expert in your field, will look at it, so it can be a little light in the methodology. But the second part, it's essentially 10 pages longer and will be sent out to specific experts of your field. And the request from the panel is essentially, guys, we are generalists. We like this project. We invited for an interview, but please let us know everything that's wrong with the methodologies, because we might have missed something. Right? So you now have 10 pages, and I'm not saying you should allocate them entirely to the methodologies, because there's some stuff that they want to know, but you want to make sure you cover all your bases there, and the space is specifically designed for that. Each objective should not depend on the others, should have the potential to stand on its own right as an important achievement in a specific field or discipline. This is especially sort of easy to do if your proposal is multidisciplinary. And so, for example, each work package or objective or aim can focus on sort of one discipline. And so you want to make sure you are contributing innovation to that single discipline, and then you have specific tasks within the objectives that synergize objective one with objective two with objective three, and ideally lead to your big reveal at the end. But if something doesn't work and you have backup and mitigation strategies, then you can still do some of the work. At the end of the backup, nothing else has worked. You still should have made a contribution to the specific field or discipline of that particular work package. And it needs to be clear in the way you plan the project and articulated the proposal that this is going to happen. That objective 1 is going to have its big deliverable, objective 2 is going to have its big deliverable, objective 3 is going to have its big deliverable, and then together, if the cross-validation pans out, then we're going to rewrite the textbook. Yeah, I just said that. A single failure should not arrest or kill the project. This is one of the biggest concerns reviewers have when they look at these frontier crazy projects. Like, we like that it's crazy. If it's not crazy, we're not even getting to this point if it's not crazy. But if it is crazy and I'm looking at the plan and the plan can fail, like very obviously I can see where, like, if they don't get access to this one reagent and they can't do the project, then the project dies. And so you don't want to kill it that way. So if you've done all the work and you hook the reviewers and they love your idea, they're okay with your CV, but then, just don't want to disappoint them with the approach. Be clear, be domain specific. Again, they will invite specific reviewers to talk about your proposal. So, be domain specific, especially in the B2, in the longer form. Be right. Like, if you have any mistakes in there, like, again, the goodwill, it's going to be used up by, hey, this person doesn't seem to appreciate how complicated the patch clamp experiment is. So how can we trust everything else in the proposal? Try to use cutting edge methods and technologies. Again, you are trying to push beyond the state of the art. And if your approach, it's not at least at the state of the art, like, your credibility of pushing beyond that, it's severely limited. And this will be noted. Where appropriate, develop new technologies. This is an easy way to, like, make an impact in one of the objectives. Like, okay, we need a new super resolution technique applied to sort of this problem, and we're going to have to develop it, but here's some preliminary feasibility data that says we might be the right people to do it, right? Again, 2 or 3 lines. You don't have a lot of time or a lot of space. So this was also mentioned earlier. It takes a lot of time. I think Mark Twain has this beautiful line that says, I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have time to write a short one. Proposals are short, like 5 pages is the B1, 15 pages is the B2. You don't have a lot of space and you have to cover a lot of ground. And so you need to really get good at writing clearly, succinctly. Brevity is your friend, but you need to it takes some courtship with brevity to get good at it. So focus on how do I write my sort of 1-page hypothesis and aims, and each aim is like 2 or 3 lines, and it really brings the point across. Try to be memorable. Some important questions on memorability is how much risk is actually too much risk. I said this before. I think it's a very important point when you're talking about DARPA, ERC type funding. Again, half of my funding comes from ERC, the other half comes from other grants where I apply a very different sort of mind frame. But if you're writing for one of these grants, it truly is high risk, high gain. And the high risk is as important as the high gain. If it's not risky, it will not be funded, regardless of payoff. It doesn't matter. It's important that we learn to distinguish the scientific risk. Like, the scientific risk is that your idea might actually not solve the problem. Like, you might actually be crazy and you were not right? So that scientific risk must stay in the project. What you don't want to have is the other project risk, like feasibility. If you look at the guidelines from the executive agency of the ERC, they clearly distinguish between risk and feasibility. They do not want feasibility issues. So again, project risks, things like, okay, dependent aims, novel reagents that you might get through a collaborator that's not, ERC has like single PIs grant, there's no collaborator. So what happens if that collaborator like shuts off his lab and that's the one source of your reagents you critically need? Like, these things will kill your proposal. So scientific risk must stay, feasibility risks must all be taken care of. But, scientific risk must be there. Like, you should feel like a scientist in your field should feel like you have 25% probability of actually making it. But they should have more than 75% confidence that you will not find feasibility issues, that your mitigation and your backup plans are sufficient, and you're going to be able to do a version of what you proposed no matter what, there's only 25% chance that everything will work out like you want it to work out for your idea to pan out. So that's the risk side of things. And then the impact, it's sort of so the gain you want to have is sort of the opposite. So how much gain is not enough gain? It's too little gain. So it's not enough if it benefits people in your field or subfield. If it's only relevant for a specific subset of people, probably the gain is not big enough. Or if it doesn't make a dent to a big problem. Again, you guys mostly work on cancer. So, if you are looking at some very interesting novel biology of a insert molecule of your choosing, which, it's very novel, it's very interesting, but the probability that it's going to impact cancer, it's limited. And you started your introduction saying that the big enemy was cancer because it's killing so many people. Then we have a gain problem. And it's also sort of a gain problem if there is no credible path to outsized returns. Like I said earlier, ERC only has excellence. There is no impact, there's no implementation. So you don't have the burden to say explicitly how you are going to do this innovation and patent it and do a startup and be credible on all these steps. But it should be relatively possible to take them and lead to the outside return. If it's like obscure and difficult, you might have an issue proving your high gain sort of aspects of the proposal. And again, some practical tips, like if you're asking yourself the question, like, is this enough gain? It probably is not enough gain. If you are reusing a grant proposal that you've used for something else, also probably not a good idea. Again, there's very few people that have the risk gain profile that ERC has. And so if you're reusing a grant for another funding agency, it probably is not a good idea. And also, this is a very easy thing. It's like if you're writing a proposal that it's not bound to annoy some big shots out there, if you're not really fighting dogma and you're not risking that the dogma standard holder is in the study session and hates you on site, then you're probably not pushing enough. Right, so try to get to a place where, okay, if I'm right, like a lot of people in my field, the blue people that I was showing earlier, like will feel the heat of what we discovered. That's a good place to be with your sort of idea here. Now, last few sort of points quickly. This takes a lot of hard work. We and the other speakers have talked about so many different things. And really, the way you do any of these is the way you do everything. So if you are an excellent scientist, then you have an obligation to also be an excellent grant writer. You also have an obligation to make amazing figure. You have an obligation to do anything at the same standard of excellence that you hold yourself at the bench or with your patients. Because again, this is a whole story. It all comes together. And if you and that's just hard work. Yeah, first speaker I love when she said, you guys should try to get extra time off from your other duties. Good luck doing that. The alternative is you're gonna have to, work longer hours. And somebody asked me at the end of one of these training sessions, how did I keep my work-life balance when I was doing mine? And I just laughed and said there wasn't any. Again, you're asking for 2 million euros of taxpayer euros on top of your existing salaries and your existing sort of privilege that you have for your job. For that period of time, you're going to have to put in a little bit more work and a little bit less life if you can't find a reasonable sort of arrangement with your institution. For example, you must study the system. So these are two key databases of all the winners and also all the panel members who will make the decision. So remember the earlier comments on marketing that people have made. You have no excuse not to know these people. 70% of the panel of 2025 in any one of the panels will be the same of 2023. And 2026 will be the same of 2024. So go on these websites, find out who these people were, and get to know them really well. What was their most successful paper, most successful review, more recent paper, most recent review? See if you have common themes, common ways of talking about the same scientific project, and use it in those proposals. Because again, if you were going to raise money from Sequoia Venture Fund, you would try to know whose partner is going to be at the meeting, what do they like, whatever they found there. And I don't know why academicians think that we shouldn't be doing this for grant proposals. So, this is what you're going to have to do. And so just because I don't preach things I didn't do, this is my bedroom when I was preparing my interview. I knew these people were going to be there and I had them. So when I was sort of rehearsing my presentation, I was doing it to their face. And this was incredibly important because at some point, kind of a tough questions came up because, again, my proposal was pissing off some people. And one of these people was in the same institution of the person I was pissing off that I probably wrote the review. And so I answered staring this person down, essentially telling them that I knew who he was, who he worked with, and that I understood where that question was coming from, and I was answering specifically. And that person ended up answering all of the other questions that I received from the panel. Every single one of them, he would always chime in. It's like, yeah, he's right. Yeah, he's right. I knew I'd won that grant when I walked out of the interview because of that interaction, and I would have not been able to do that, right? And now that takes just hard work. I'm sorry, there's no other way to say it. There's a culture now where hard work is toxic, longer hours are toxic, everything is wrong, and you shouldn't be asked to do that. I'm here to tell you that I do it, that my people do it, and if you want to take a win in the same competitions where we apply, you must do it. Look at it that way. Maybe I'm the asshole here, but it just takes hard work. So be smart about it. Follow the advice that you've received earlier. Reach out to a consultant that can help you with the things you don't know it, but don't lower your standard of excellence because you want to keep sort of an easy approach to this as well. If you want more than your standard, then you have to work more than your standard. Now, money is actually the easiest part of the job. I told you how much money we raise in my group. I didn't tell you is that we haven't published as many papers. And why? Because that's difficult. So essentially, this is the research group, how it works. You need money to hire trainees that can do projects so you can write papers that can lead to more proposals, that can lead to more grants. And I'll send you the slides. We don't have to spend more time on this, but essentially the same math here, right? Like you need a certain amount of papers per proposals with a certain success rate so you can guarantee another grant comes in and you can hire more people. And this is hard. And the only reason I'm telling you today is because you have to raise money for this to become a problem. But raising money here is the easiest part. Hiring your first trainee, very difficult. Hiring your 10th trainee when you don't have time to talk to people as much as you did when you hired the first person, much, much harder. Making sure the papers get written in a style and with a quality that's high enough for your group when you're not there doing most of the work, super difficult. And I'm telling you today because you now have the luxury of being in somebody else's group and that person is, footing the bill. So he's paying for your training. So take advantage of that. Look around. Don't just look at your science. Look at, okay, how is my PI managing funding? How many papers do we publish per proposal that he writes? How many proposals does he or she writes that leads to one funded grant that we can hire somebody? These things are very different in different parts of the world, different sort of cultures. So you're going to have to sort of specialize it for your thing. But, look around and use the time when you're not the PI to learn as much as possible about these other things. Because if you only do research, I promise you that when you become a PI, your time to do research will go down dramatically, and all of these other skills are going to become super necessary. And if you must learn all of this on your tenure clock, if you're in the US or equivalent system, if you are on a sort of time contract, it's going to be expensive. If you can learn as much of this on your current PIs, sort of payroll, I think it's a much better strategy. Again, I was fortunate enough to get a lot of training around these things in Boston. So this is something I want to encourage people to do, even if your PI doesn't have that sort of standardized way to teaching you lab leadership. Some things are taught, some things are caught. So be there and try to catch as much as possible. Finally, don't give up. This is the formula. There is a chance term here. There's a luck term. You can only average that out. You can be unlucky at any one draw, any one time you apply for a grant, you might not get it. But if you continue to apply and you don't give up, eventually you can't always be unlucky. A lot of people that complain about luck confused, I was unlucky with actually I wasn't prepared. Like I actually did not check the winners CVs, and so I didn't know that I wasn't competitive. I wrote my CV poorly. I wrote my project poorly. I didn't make sure I was emphasizing how I was the right PI for the project, not because I wrote a section that says, why me, why now, but because through the project, it became very clear that I was the right person to do this. Like all these things are not luck, right? All these things are you didn't prepare well enough. Sometimes it's still a factor, like the person you pissed off with your idea is actually in the panel. You're not winning that year. End of story. So you apply the next year and you learn your lesson, and that's it. That's part of what makes this game sort of betting on a proposal, right? And And that's it. But if you don't piss off anybody, then you're not winning at any year, right? Like your proposal will fall flat, will not be interesting enough, will not be pushing the boundary enough. And so you're better off taking the chance of annoying somebody. Again, I told you my example. If it wasn't somebody from the same institution in the panel, but the guy that I was, my idea was against in the panel, I would be telling a different story today. So with that, everything will be okay in the end, as John Lennon. If it's not okay today, or if it's not okay in 1 year, then it's not the end. So keep pushing, and it'll be okay at the end. With that, thank you so much. And I think maybe I was a little out of time.
Thank you, Professor Pasqualini. So
Francesco's
now,
fine.
Sorry?
Francesco is fine. Sorry,
Francesco. Okay. So now we are at the end of all the presentation. It's time for queries. So if anyone would like to pose and to profit of this moment to ask queries to our speakers, this is the time.